Imagine waking up to a world where the US dollar in your pocket is no longer the global reserve currency. It's not a plot for a dystopian movie. It's a repeat of August 1971. And we are currently standing on the precipice of a 2026 sequel that will be 10 times more volatile. The rules of the global financial game have been changed behind closed doors, and if you're still playing by the 20th century playbook, you are already losing. The three pillars that have propped up the American empire for half a century, trust, yields, and the petrodollar, are not just weakening. They are in a state of total structural collapse. Right now, as you watch this, global alliances are shifting, and the petrodollar system that forced every nation to buy U.S. debt is being dismantled by the very countries that created it. This is the inflection point, the moment where the largest wealth transfer in human history shifts from a slow leak to a flash flood. The reality is brutal. We are trapped in a cycle of negative real yields. This means that even if your bank account balance stays the same, your ability to buy food, energy, and land is being systematically siphoned off to fund a debt ceiling that no longer exists. Most people will spend the next decade wondering where their life savings went. A select few will understand that in a crisis of this magnitude, wealth isn't destroyed, it is moved. In this deep dive, we are exposing the historical parallels between Nixon's 1971 shock and the current geopolitical powder keg in the Middle East. We're going to reveal why the U.S. economy has exactly 3 options left, and why every single one of them results in the death of paper currency as we know it. The window to position yourself into real, hard assets is closing faster than the mainstream media will ever admit. You need to understand the mechanics of this reset now, or you will be the one providing the liquidity for those who do. History shows that when these shifts happen, they happen slowly at first, then all at once. By the time this video ends, you will know exactly which side of the transfer you are on. The window is open, for now. To understand the magnitude of what is unfolding in 2026, we have to pull back the curtain on the greatest bait and switch in human history. In August 1971, when Richard Nixon stood before the nation and temporarily suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold, he didn't just change a policy. He changed the nature of reality for every human being on the planet. For the first time in 5,000 years, the world's primary medium of exchange was backed by nothing but a promise. But a promise is only as good as the power of the person making it. To keep that promise from evaporating, the U.S. struck a deal that would define the next half-century, the petrodollar. The agreement was simple. The U.S. would provide military protection to the House of Saud, and in exchange, every single barrel of oil exported from the Middle East would be priced exclusively in U.S. dollars. This created a synthetic global demand for the greenback that was divorced from the actual health of the American economy. If you wanted to keep the lights on in Paris, Tokyo, or Berlin, you had to own U.S. dollars. This allowed the U.S. to export its inflation to the rest of the world, printing trillions of dollars to fund wars, social programs, and infrastructure, while the rest of the world absorbed the consequences. But that geopolitical handshake has expired. As you sit here today, the structural pillars of that era are not just cracking, they are being systematically dismantled. The headlines you see about BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, expanding their membership isn't just about political posturing. It is a direct, coordinated attack on the dollar's monopoly. When Saudi Arabia, the cornerstone of the petrodollar, begins accepting the Chinese yuan for oil, the demand floor for the U.S. dollar doesn't just lower, it vanishes. This is where it becomes personal for you. Most people look at the economy through the lens of prices. They see the price of eggs, rent, and insurance going up, and they call it inflation. But that is a fundamental misunderstanding of the tragedy. Prices aren't going up. The value of your currency is going down. You are standing on a treadmill that is accelerating backward, and no matter how hard you work, you are losing ground. This is the reality of negative real yields. Right now, the interest you earn in a high-yield savings account, or even a government bond, is being dwarfed by the actual, real-world loss of purchasing power. If the government tells you inflation is 3%, but your grocery bill is up 20%, and your energy costs are up 15%, you are living through a wealth confiscation program. Your savings account isn't a safety net, it's a leaky bucket. Every day you leave your wealth in paper currency, you are donating your labor to a system that is using that very liquidity to pay off its own unpayable debts. We are currently witnessing the death spiral of the debt-based system. The U.S. national debt is accelerating at a rate of $1 trillion every 100 days. To service the interest on that debt, the government must issue more debt. To buy that debt, the Federal Reserve must print more currency, which further devalues the dollars already in your pocket. It is a mathematical certainty that this ends in a reset. The middle class is being hollowed out because they are the ones who play by the old rules. They save in cash, they invest in safe paper assets, and they believe the narrative that the system will eventually stabilize. But history tells a different story. From the Weimar Republic to the Roman Empire, when a state can no longer pay its debts with real value, it pays them by destroying the currency. The 2026 sequel to 1971 isn't about a recession. It's about the total reconfiguration of what we consider money. You feel the tension in the air. The geopolitical powder keg in the Middle East and the shifting alliances in the East are the outward symptoms of a dying financial order. The world is moving back to a hard asset reality, where energy, food, and commodities dictate power, not the ability to print digital digits on a screen. The inflection point we talked about earlier is the moment the world realizes that the IOU of the U.S. Treasury is no longer the safest asset in the world. For the last 50 years, the U.S. dollar was the cleanest dirty shirt in the laundry. Every other currency was worse, so everyone stayed in the dollar. But the game has changed. We are no longer comparing the dollar to the euro or the yen. The world is now comparing the dollar to real stuff. However, there is a massive misconception that everyone is going to be poor when this happens. That is the great lie. The wealth of the world, the land, the gold, the technology, the resources, doesn't disappear. It simply changes hands. It moves from those who hold the promise, the paper, to those who hold the proof, the asset. But here is the twist, the pattern interrupt that no one is telling you on the evening news. Most people think the Federal Reserve and the global elite are trying to fix the dollar to prevent a collapse. They believe the goal is to return to the stability of the 1990s. But what if I told you the collapse isn't a failure of the system? What if the volatility we are seeing in 2026 is actually the controlled demolition of the old system to make way for a new, even more restrictive digital financial architecture? The crisis isn't an accident, it's the transition. And if you are waiting for things to go back to normal, you are the one who is going to pay for the upgrade. This upgrade has a name, CBDC. Central bank digital currencies are not just a digital version of the dollars in your bank account. They are a total overhaul of the nature of private property. In the old system, the bank owed you money. In the new system, the government permits you to spend. This is the ultimate mini payoff. The chaos we see in the markets isn't a failure of leadership. It is the deliberate clearing of the site to build a digital panopticon. But why 2026? Why is the clock ticking so loudly right now? To understand the urgency, you have to look at the interest expense graveyard. For decades, the U.S. could ignore its debt because interest rates were effectively zero. It was free money. But as inflation spiked, the Fed was forced to raise rates, turning that free money into a $1 trillion annual interest bill. Right now, the U.S. government is spending more on interest than on its entire national defense budget. This is the micro hook. We have reached the point of no return where the government is borrowing money just to pay the interest on the money it already borrowed. It's a Ponzi scheme at a sovereign level, and it's about to hit a mathematical wall. This brings us to the three impossible options the U.S. economy has left. Option 1. Outright default. The U.S. simply tells its creditors, China, Japan, and your pension fund, that it isn't paying. This would result in an instant global depression, the immediate halt of international trade, and the collapse of the global supply chain. It is the nuclear option. Option 2. Austerity. Extreme tax hikes and massive cuts to Social Security and Medicare. In a polarized political climate, this is electoral suicide. No politician will vote to starve their voters to pay back a central bank. That leaves option 3, the great devaluation. This is the path they have already chosen. They will print enough currency to pay the debt, but in doing so, they will make the currency worthless. This is the mini payoff for anyone wondering why their cost of living is skyrocketing while the stock market hits all-time highs. The market isn't growing. The yardstick used to measure it is shrinking. But here is the micro hook that should keep you awake tonight. When the dollar loses its status as the world's unit of account, all those trillions of dollars held overseas by foreign central banks come rushing back home. It's called repatriation. Imagine a tidal wave of paper hitting the U.S. shores, competing for the same houses, the same gallons of milk, and the same acres of land that you are trying to buy. This isn't a theory. It's already happening in the energy markets. For 50 years, the Petrodollar was the invisible tether that forced the world to hold dollars. If you wanted oil, you needed greenbacks. But in 2024 and 2025, the unthinkable happened. Saudi Arabia officially allowed the 50-year Petrodollar agreement to expire. They are now settling trades in yen, euros, and even gold. The mini payoff is clear. The global demand floor for the dollar has been pulled out. The dollar is no longer backed by black gold. It is backed by nothing but a military that is increasingly stretched thin. So, where is the money going? The smartest players on the board, the ones who actually move the markets, are moving into the fortress asset class. They are exiting contractual wealth and entering direct wealth. A contractual wealth is a promise from a bank, a broker, or a government. It's a line of code in a database that can be frozen, deleted, or devalued with a keystroke. Direct wealth is something you own without counterparty risk. This is the micro hook. The very people telling you to stay diversified in paper assets are the ones quietly stockpiling physical gold, silver, uranium, and productive farmland at record speeds. They are trading the promise for the proof. Look at the central banks themselves. In the last 24 months, global central banks have purchased more physical gold than at any time since 1967. Ask yourself, why would the people who print the paper be desperately trading that paper for gold? They know the 2026 sequel to the Nixon shock is coming, and they are making sure they are on the winning side of the ledger. The wealth transfer is essentially a giant game of musical chairs. The music is the flow of cheap credit and dollar dominance. The chairs are hard assets. As we approach 2026, the music isn't just slowing down. The power to the record player is being cut. Most people are still dancing. They see the soft landing headlines and believe the narrative. But the mini payoff here is brutal. The soft landing is a narrative designed to keep you in the burning building so the smart money can exit through the back door. They need your liquidity to sell their overvalued paper assets before the reset. But there is a specific mechanism, a black swan catalyst, that most people are completely overlooking. It's not just about the debt, and it's not just about the bricks, it's about the velocity crisis. For years, money sat still in savings accounts, but as people realize the dollar is dying, they will start spending it faster and faster to get rid of it. This is the transition from inflation to hyperinflation. It's the moment the psychological trust in the currency snaps. Once that trust snaps, the window to protect yourself doesn't just close, it vanishes. You cannot buy fire insurance while the house is already engulfed in flames. The micro hook for the final stage of this transition is the Great Reset evaluations. We are about to see a world where the Dow Jones isn't measured in dollars, but in ounces. A world where the value of your labor isn't measured in a fluctuating fiat currency, but in your ownership of the means of production. The elite are already positioned. The BRICS nations are already building their own M-bridge payment systems to bypass the dollar entirely. The 1971 playbook is being shredded in real time. The question isn't whether the system will change. The question is what you will hold in your hands when the smoke clears. We are moving from an era of financial engineering to an era of resource reality. In this new world, if you can't touch it, you don't own it. If you don't control the keys, you don't have the assets. But there is one final piece of the puzzle, a specific asset that the government is trying to regulate out of existence while simultaneously accumulating behind the scenes. This is the pattern interrupt that changes everything. Because while gold is the shield, this asset is the sword. And in 2026, you're going to need both. This brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the sword that complements the shield of physical gold. While gold protects you from the floor falling out, this asset allows you to strike back against the devaluation and capture the upside of the new digital reality. That asset is Bitcoin. The mainstream media paints it as a volatile gamble, yet the very institutions warning you away from it, BlackRock, Fidelity, and global central banks, are the ones building the infrastructure to own it. They are trying to regulate it out of your reach because it is the only asset in human history with an absolute mathematical scarcity that no government can print, no bank can freeze, and no empire can devalue. It is the pattern interrupt because it represents the first time the people have an exit ramp from a dying fiat system that doesn't require a middleman's permission. In 1971, Nixon took away your choice. In 2026, the convergence of the debt spiral, the death of the petrodollar, and the rise of CBDCs is designed to take away your control. But for the first time in 50 years, the bait and switch isn't working on everyone. The inflection point we've been discussing is the realization that you no longer have to be the liquidity for the elite's exit strategy. When the tidal wave of repatriated dollars hits U.S. shores, the price of everything you need, land, energy, and food, will skyrocket in dollar terms. But in terms of hard assets, the value remains constant. The wealth isn't vanishing. It is merely being repriced into things that cannot be conjured out of thin air. The three impossible options facing the U.S. economy prove that the system is not broken. It is finished. Whether through default austerity or the chosen path of hyperdevaluation, the era of the paper promise is over. We are returning to a resource reality. The true mini-payoff of this entire journey is the clarity that comes from seeing the board for what it really is. The 2026 sequel to the Nixon shock is not a tragedy for those who understand the mechanics of the transfer. It is the single greatest opportunity for generational wealth positioning in the history of the modern world. You have seen the interest expense graveyard and the death spiral of the dollar. You understand now that the volatility in the Middle East and the shifting BRICS alliances are not random geopolitical events, but the deliberate dismantling of a 50-year-old handshake. The Great Reset is a choice between two futures, one where you are a participant in a programmable, digital panopticon via CBDCs, or one where you are a sovereign owner of your labor and its value through proof rather than promises. The elite are not waiting for the reset to happen. They are the ones orchestrating the controlled demolition to ensure they own the new architecture. They are trading their depreciating paper for the fortress asset class right now. They are buying the farmland you'll need for food, the uranium you'll need for power, and the gold and Bitcoin you'll need for trade. They are moving from contractual wealth to direct wealth, because they know that when the music stops, the only thing that matters is what you can touch, what you can defend, and what you truly own. This is the moment of sovereign clarity. The window is closing, but it is not yet shut. The difference between those who will spend the next decade in poverty and those who will emerge with more wealth than they ever imagined is simply the courage to act on this information before the velocity crisis takes hold. Once the psychological trust in the currency snaps, the transition from inflation to hyperinflation happens in a heartbeat. History shows that these resets happen slowly at first, then all at once. You now understand the historical parallels. You see the mathematical wall the debt is hitting. You recognize the bait and switch of the digital dollar. Most importantly, you know that in a crisis of this magnitude, wealth is never destroyed, it is moved. You are no longer standing on a treadmill accelerating backward. You have the map to step off the track and onto the bedrock of resource reality. The rules of the game have changed, and for the first time in 50 years, you finally know how to win. The inflection point is here. The shift is inevitable. The only remaining question is which side of the ledger you will occupy when the New World Order begins. You have the shield. You have the sword. The transition has already begun. The clarity you have right now is your most valuable asset, but clarity without consistent intelligence is quickly lost in the fog of mainstream propaganda. The elites are counting on you to lose focus. They want you to get distracted by the daily noise while they continue their silent migration into the fortress asset class. This channel exists to ensure that doesn't happen. We don't just track the headlines. We decode the structural shifts that are hollowing out your purchasing power in real time. As the velocity crisis approaches and the transition to CBD size accelerates, the window to move from contractual wealth to direct wealth will become narrower and more dangerous to navigate. Every week, we provide the deep dive analysis into the specific moves of global central banks, the breakdown of the Petrodollar, and the emergence of the new resource-based economy. We are building a community of sovereign individuals who refuse to be the liquidity for the elite's exit strategy. If you realize that the old playbook is dead and you are ready to master the new rules of the resource reality, then you need to be part of this intelligence network. By securing your place here, you aren't just following a channel. You are ensuring that as the debt spiral tightens and the 2026 sequel unfolds, You have the tactical data required to keep your shield up and your sword sharp. The transfer of wealth is already moving at a flash flood pace. The question isn't whether the system will change, but whether you will have the foresight to profit from the transition while others are liquidated by it. Join this movement of sovereign clarity now, so that when the psychological trust in the currency finally snaps, you aren't looking for answers. You're already positioned in the assets. The next phase of the controlled demolition is already underway. Stay ahead of the reset. Stay sovereign.